There are moments in every life when the future is not merely shaped by a choice, but forged in a single, unyielding instant. Before such moments, there is often a profound, almost silent apathy, the stillness before a great and necessary storm. Our story begins not with a crime, but with an absence of will, not with malice, but with a dangerous drift. This room, for years, had been a stage where young minds negotiated the complex landscape of history and ethics. But for one student, Ethan, it had become merely a waiting room, a place where time was suffered, not seized. He was 17, standing on the precipice of his own adulthood, yet completely paralyzed by a self-imposed inertia. The consequence he faced was not a punitive act from an institution, but a quiet, crushing inevitability, born of his own repeated avoidance. Asterisk consequence is often foreshadowed. It announces its arrival not with a shout, but with an echo, the faint, persistent reminder of the standard we have chosen to ignore. For Ethan, that standard was represented by the teacher who stood silently at the head of the room. A man whose authority was not commanded, but simply was. Ethan sat near the back, a study in willful distraction. His world was not confined by the walls of the classroom. It was outside, in the formless promise of freedom he mistakenly believed awaited him. He had convinced himself that the rules were meaningless, that the lessons were obsolete, and that his own profound detachment was a form of sophisticated rebellion. To drift, he would soon learn, is to surrender control to the currents of fate. He was losing his grasp on reality itself, and reality is an unforgiving tutor. In contrast, stood Mr. Harrison. He was a historian, a man whose understanding of human failure was rooted in centuries of documented mistakes. His severity was not personal. It was the measured gravity of a man who understood the heavy price of indifference. He was writing a date on the board, not a date from the past, but the literal date, a symbol of the present moment being wasted, a moment that could never be reclaimed. He finished writing and turned. His gaze was not accusatory. It was simply witnessing. There is a powerful, almost unbearable weight in being truly seen when you are trying to hide. Mr. Harrison understood that the most profound discipline is the discipline of attention, the focus required to see reality clearly. And Ethan, in his persistent gaze away from the present, was losing his grasp on reality itself. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound. It was the palpable tension of consequence hanging in the air. The other students, recognizing the ritual, understood that something significant was occurring, a tipping of the scales. They were silent witnesses to a critical, private reckoning. In their faces, we see the universal fear of being held accountable. They knew, intuitively, that the standard was for all of them, and one of their own was failing the test of character. Mr. Harrison spoke, his voice low, firm, and entirely devoid of emotion. It was the sound of an unbreakable decree. He pointed not with an aggressive jab, but with a slow, deliberate extension of the arm, a gesture of warning, and a final, clear definition of the stakes. This was not about a missed assignment. It was about a trajectory of self-destruction. The hand was steady, a perfect vector of accountability aimed directly at Ethan's future. At that moment, the true weight of the confrontation descended upon Ethan. It wasn't the words of the teacher, but the overwhelming presence of his own failures reflected in Mr. Harrison's calm gaze. He lowered his eyes, not in submission to a person, but in the first, agonizing recognition of a truth he had desperately tried to avoid. The drift must stop. His shame was the dawning of self-awareness, the necessary first wound of true growth. The inner struggle manifested in a physical tension. His hands, clenched into tight, resistant fists, were the only visible sign of the battle raging within. This was the silent, physical protest against the standard he was being forced to acknowledge. The discipline had begun, not through external force, but through the internal, agonizing conflict between ego and truth. The white knuckles spoke volumes of the resistance to the idea of change. But beneath the resistance, a small, fragile seed of resolution was being planted. Asterisk, and then silence returned, broken only by the deliberate, slow tick of the wall clock. In moments of high consequence, time itself seems to slow down, demanding that the gravity of the choice be fully absorbed. Each tick was not just a passing second. It was a hammer blow of present reality, driving home the finality of this confrontation. The hour hand was moving toward a point of no return. Asterisk. Mr. Harrison delivered the words that would resonate for a decade. They were the last warning. He spoke not of school failure, but of life failure, the slow, subtle decay of a potential that had been abandoned. His tone was firm, yet infused with a quiet, profound compassion, the kind that recognizes the potential of a soul, even as it condemns its present path. He was offering a clear map of the abyss, not to scare, but to guide. The light caught the wisdom and controlled authority in his eyes. Asterisk, the class departed, leaving Ethan in the profound solitude of a choice already made. He remained seated, the echo of the teacher's voice filling the vast emptiness of the room. The words were not a command to change, but a clear, non-negotiable depiction of the road he was on. The discipline had been administered, not to his body, but directly to his conscience. The heavy silence magnified the truth he had tried to avoid, forcing him to reckon with the image of the man he was becoming. Asterisk, Mr. Harrison, standing by the dusty window, looked out at the fading light. He had done all he could. The role of true authority is not to force obedience, but to clearly illuminate the standard and then step back. The ultimate act of discipline is self-discipline. The final consequence is always administered by life itself. The teacher was merely the vessel for an immutable law. He offered the truth. Ethan had to choose to absorb it. Asterisk, Ethan walked out of the school and into the sunset. He believed he was escaping authority. In reality, he was merely entering the long, unsupervised corridor of consequence. The initial taste of freedom, the ability to choose his own direction, was intoxicating, but the road was empty, leading nowhere but further into his own self-imposed exile. The long shadows stretching out behind him visually represented the echoes of the warning already beginning to pursue him. He quickly discovered that life offers no substitutes for discipline. Asterisk, the days bled into weeks, characterized not by grand adventures, but by the relentless, quiet crush of boredom and financial scarcity. Without the rigid structure of school, his energy dissipated, replaced by a consuming anxiety that felt far heavier than any classroom rule. He chased fleeting, superficial distractions, late nights, aimless wanderings, the company of others who also sought to avoid responsibility, but the true consequence was the profound loss of his own center. He thought he was defying a teacher. He was merely defying the necessary laws of adulthood. Every missed alarm, every unreturned call, every small lie compounded into a debt he had yet to pay. The echo of Mr. Harrison's words began as a whisper, then grew into a haunting, persistent presence, a counter-narrative to his own self-deception. This aimlessness was the true, silent consequence. A life without a standard is a life without direction. Asterisk. The lesson arrived not with the crack of a ruler, but with the cold, legal precision of a termination letter. He had been given a chance at a simple stockroom job, a chance he treated with the same flippancy he had shown his studies. One missed shift led to another. One small lie necessitated a larger one, until the structure collapsed entirely. The consequence was immediate, final, and undeniable. Life had enforced the standard. Punctuality, consistency, and integrity were non-negotiable requirements for even the most basic survival. The cold wind that blew across his face now felt like the inexorable, unfeeling judgment of the world itself. He was alone, his small savings dwindling, facing eviction from his cheap room. The weight of his irresponsibility was a physical burden. Asterisk, it was in the utter stillness of his absolute low point, a tiny, cheap room with harsh lighting, that the last warning finally delivered its purpose. He wasn't thinking of the words themselves, but of the face that spoke them. A face of unwavering standard, yet profound hope. He realized the discipline was never about controlling him. It was about equipping him to control his own destiny. The standard was a gift, not a burden. He saw that Mr. Harrison's sternness was the ultimate act of compassion, a clarity he could never have given himself. Asterisk, he sat there, staring at the peeling paint, and understood the truth. He had been given the map to the future, and he had thrown it away. Now, stranded and anxious, he had to reconstruct the map from memory, word by agonizing word. The shame of his failure was transformed, not into self-pity, but into a fierce, quiet resolve. A new standard was born. It was an internal one, forged in regret, tempered by hardship. He chose to be his own unyielding standard-bearer. The journey of accountability began not with a grand gesture, but with a small, quiet, profoundly difficult decision, to acknowledge the truth of his past and to commit to the meticulous, tedious, day-by-day effort of self-reform. He recognized that self-discipline is the only currency that buys true freedom. Asterisk. The first true act of reform is always acknowledgement, not to seek forgiveness, but to confirm to oneself and the universe that the lesson has been received. Ethan found an old notepad and began to write not an essay on history, but a concise, honest accounting of his own mistakes. It was an apology not just to a man, but to the standard that man represented. The act of writing was the ultimate act of discipline, a commitment in ink to a new way of living, a silent promise to the man he was determined to become. Asterisk, years passed. The letter found its way to Mr. Harrison, now retired. He read it in the quiet solitude of his study, sitting by a window, surrounded by the history he loved. The true reward of a mentor is not seeing their student succeed, but seeing their student become the author of their own discipline. The quiet smile was not one of victory, but of profound confirmation. The echo had reached its destination, and the life had been successfully reclaimed. He had only pointed the way. The student had walked the path. Asterisk, the next decade was a testament to the unyielding standard Ethan imposed upon himself. He secured his credentials through relentless effort in night classes, the difficulty of the material, a constant, necessary discipline. He chose a career in ethical counseling, guiding others through the very moral chasms he had once stumbled into. His new life was not defined by wealth or grand status, but by its sheer reliability and integrity. He never sought the easy path, for he understood that ease was the very thing that had almost destroyed him. The discipline of the alarm clock, the discipline of the budget, the discipline of truth, these were the pillars of his new, hard-earned freedom. He was no longer running from the rules. He was living by the code he had once been warned about. This was his true redemption. Asterisk, years dissolved, carrying the weight of the old self away. Ethan returned to the empty, silent classroom, now a man of 37, not seeking validation, but seeking the profound quiet of the origin point. He was standing in the exact spot where he had first felt the cold, hard press of consequence, and he was grateful. The sunlight streaming through the dusty windows now illuminated his confidence, not his shame. His posture was upright, confident, and utterly grounded. His expression was one of deep, calm reflection and profound understanding. Asterisk, his hand, now steady and mature, reached out and gently rested on the scarred surface of the old wooden desk. The contrast between the self-assured hand of the man and the rough, aged wood told the entire story, the raw material of the past, touched by the refined consequence of the present. He realized the last warning was never a threat. It was a mirror held up to the truth of the man he was becoming if he failed to change. Asterisk. The true echo of consequence is not regret, but the profound, quiet gratitude for the discipline that saved you. Authority had set the standard. He had chosen to meet it. This is the ultimate truth of reform, that the toughest lesson is the one you finally decide to teach yourself.